You are here for interviews prep for success with Andrea Skipper. My name is Olga Escamilla, and I also have Laura Greer here, and we are going to be your hosts for today. Without further ado, I want to welcome our presenter, Andrea Skipper. So Andrea is a post-exit workforce integration coordinator at Community Action Incorporated of Central Texas. She has experience teaching both ESL and ABE. She previously worked as an employer experience manager in the fashion retail sector, and she has an MBA in management and human resources from Louisiana State University, Shreveport. So welcome, Andrea, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so you take it away.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Olga. So like she said, my name is Andrea Skipper, and we'll be going over interviews prep for success today. So our objectives for today, we want to start out with talking about some mental preparation. So how can we help students feel comfortable with the idea of talking to employers? That's one of the biggest barriers, is they don't feel confident going into the interview, so they don't perform well. So we'll talk about some strategies for that. We'll also talk about what interviewers are looking for. What are they paying attention to in the interview that our students may not realize is important? Some difficult topics to overcome. Many of our students have some type of challenge that they've had to overcome, and knowing how to tackle these challenges head on in the interview will help them feel much more confident. We'll cover types of questions. There's really only 3 types of questions that are asked in interviews, and we'll talk about how to format our answers to those. And lastly, how we can practice, so how we can support students in their employment journey regarding interviews. So I wanted to start out with talking about how does employment affect our AEL programs? It is something that's measured. Each program is measured on about 9 aspects, and 2 of these are related to employment. So first of all, they're measured after quarter 2. So once they've left your classroom for 90 days, we're expected to have 34% of those students be either employed or enrolled in a post-secondary institution like a college. And of those 34% that are employed or enrolled, 79.7% of those are expected to continue their employment through quarters 3 and 4. So we want them to get a job and continue to stay in that job. And of course, to get the job, they have to be able to interview first. How do you help students prepare for interviews right now? Okay, see some mock interviews. Teach a class and do one-on-one, talk about dressing, lesson planning, partner with career services. That's an excellent idea. Lots of examples. Okay, great. Those are lots of great things that we do. I see a lot of you are doing mock interviews. That's great that they're getting that time to practice, but they need lots of examples also. Show them what to do before you have them practice it. So great. So now let's think really quick, what is the purpose of the hiring process? So our students are needing to prove that they have the skills for the job, the personal qualities, and also the culture fit. So they're looking for a variety of things within this hiring process, including the application, the resume, and the interview. So one of the most helpful things that I've done with students who are nervous about interviewing is to ask them a simple question. And that is, what is the worst thing that can happen? They usually take a second to reflect, but their answer always comes down to, they say no. There really are only 2 things that can happen in the interview. They'll either get the job or they won't. There's only the 2 options. And in my experience, many of our students have faced a variety of situations in the past where they feel belittled or embarrassed by other people. So when students know that the worst thing that can happen is a rejection email, their anxiety nearly vanishes when we're continuing to practice for the interview in the classroom or in my office when we're meeting one-on-one. So making sure they know nothing really that bad is going to happen to me is very important so that they feel comfortable and have a good learning and practice environment for the interview. Okay, and also telling them that the employer is not going to take the time to reprimand them for mistakes in the interview. They're not going to say, well, that wasn't a good answer or anything like that. So the students know it's not the end of the world if they don't do great on every single question in the interview. So after we've built their confidence regarding what the worst outcome would be, we need to help them actually prepare. I've had a lot of students in the past try to write their answers to common interview questions and memorize those answers word for word. And typically those are the students that tend to do the worst when I don't let them use their notes in a practice interview. So they'll go home, they'll write out all of their answers, they'll read them and read them and read them. And then they get into the practice interview and they can't really answer the questions because they've been so focused on memorizing exactly which words they want to do. So we want them to focus on practicing and being prepared rather than memorizing. And it's also important to recognize that students may feel like their experience or education is inadequate for the position, which leads to some self-conscious thoughts that may make them want to lie in an interview. You know, as ethical people, and your students, they're probably not bad people. They want to do a good job, but they feel very nervous. So they feel like they should make themselves sound more qualified than they actually are before they're scared. But it's important to emphasize to students, you have to be yourself. So they only need to talk about truthful experiences, truthful education that they have, but just present it in the best way possible, a little bit polished, if you will. Because if they get a job and they've lied in the interview or lied on the resume and they get the job, and the employer finds out, they can be fired from the job. Texas has at-will employment, so they can be lied for anything like that. So we want to make sure they know the consequences of if they embellish their resume or embellish their answers in the interview. So in addition to feeling confident, they also need to look confident. And there are a few things that students might not think about when it comes to looking confident. So first impressions matter. Even if they have a stellar resume and are well prepared for the interview questions, first impressions with appearances make a difference. The interview is going to make a snap judgment on the person they're interviewing before they even open their mouth. So they need to make sure that they look nice. The best advice that I have to tell students about what should I wear to the interview is to be one step above what they would wear in the job. For example, if their job has a very casual dress code, maybe they wear shorts and a t-shirt, then maybe they could wear pants and a blouse or collared shirt for the interview. If they would wear khakis and a polo for their uniform, they can wear a button-down shirt and dress slacks. The only exception for this rule really would be for the medical field. If they're interviewing for a job like a home health aide, CNA, or medication aide, wearing clean or unwrinkled scrubs would be acceptable. And I got that information from a variety of medical recruiters in my area. And they said they don't prefer one over the other. Scrubs or the business casual is fine for those medical positions. Another thing to talk about students with is to avoid distracting pieces in their outfit. So before working in adult education, I was a hiring manager, and one of the most challenging things for me was to make sure that I was paying attention to what the person was saying, the words they're saying, rather than paying attention to how they were dressed or how nervous they were. Because just like the interviewee can get distracted, the interviewer can also easily get distracted. So we want our students to, we want to make sure our students are heard rather than just seen. So telling them to not wear distracting pieces like large bright necklaces and busy patterns on their clothes should be avoided. We also have to make sure we show students examples. So they need to, don't just tell them what to wear, show them what to wear. Maybe you wear an interview outfit to class when you teach about interviews, or show them photos and different options of types of things that they should wear. Sometimes students might say, well, I can't afford that because it looks really fancy. There are tons of interview outfits you can find at Goodwill and other thrift stores that are pretty low cost, because a lot of people wear it once for an interview and never wear it again. So lots of options to find things to wear for the interview. In addition to things that they should wear, there are some things that you should tell students they should not wear or not do, because they might not realize that these could be impacting their level of success in the interview. So some of these include plunging necklines, headphones, and this includes the little AirPods that people wear now, especially the younger students that you have might say, well, I'm not listening to anything, so it's not a big deal. The interviewer doesn't know that they're not listening to something, so they shouldn't have those headphones in. Also wearing too much perfume, overly casual attire, outdated styles or dirty shoes. Even if they don't have nice shoes, they can at least have clean shoes to wear. And also avoiding excessive accessories. Another point to make with students is about their cell phones. In our society, it feels like sometimes we're attached or attentive to our cell phones all the time. But during the interview, students should not be looking at their cell phone, using their cell phone at any time. So having that conversation with them saying, hey, you should make sure you turn your cell phone off or on silent during the interview is important. And also talk to them about smartwatches like Apple Watches, because if those go off during the interview, it can distract the interviewee and the interviewer. I've even in the past, when I've interviewed people before, real life interviews, I've had them pull out their cell phone and say, hold on, I need to text this person back, or hold on, this is my mom, I need to take this phone call. So if your student is doing that in the job interview, then the employer is going to say, are you going to be doing that when you're supposed to be working on the clock? So that's a huge red flag for employers. So please make sure you talk with your students about not using cell phones in the interview. Now let's talk briefly about body language. Sometimes our words say one thing about but our body says another. So if we're explaining to an interviewer that we would be a great fit for a customer service position because we're outgoing and friendly, but in the interview we act very nervous and we're avoiding eye contact, it's not going to give off the right impression. So students should make a point to make eye contact with their interviewer, even if they feel nervous. They should really try to force themselves to make eye contact throughout the interview. Not staring at the interviewer, but making casual eye contact, just like they're in conversation. Also making sure they have good posture. So sitting up straight, that's going to give the impression that they're interested in what the interviewer has to say. Using some open hand gestures. So one of the telltale signs that someone's nervous is they, wring their fingers and play with their hands a lot. So making students conscientious of what are they doing with their hands during the interview is important. So when they're talking, trying to have hand gestures with their palms up gives the interviewer a more welcoming feeling from the interviewee. Avoid touching the face. So sometimes when our students get nervous, they start touching their face, playing with their hair, things like that. And that's something that can be really distracting for the interviewer. And lastly, the student needs to make sure they're smiling. And they might say, well, I'm wearing a mask, so how can I smile at them? They can smile with their eyes. If they have joy in their eyes and their smile, the interviewer will be able to see that. And that's so important because the interviewer wants to feel like they're interested and like they're happy. People don't like to hire people who aren't happy to be there. They don't want an employee that's going to say, oh, I hate going to work every day. So they want to see happy people working for them. So, talking about body language and feeling confident, one of the top questions I get from my students is, what do I do if I mess up? I get so nervous when I'm interviewing that sometimes I forget what to say or I trip over my words. And that feels very discouraging in the interview for them. They feel like, oh, I'm definitely not going to get this job. But that's not true. An interviewer will be forgiving of mistakes if they can come back from it. So if the student makes the mistake, they just need to take a moment, collect themselves, and move forward. It's not the end of the world if they make one mistake. Making a mistake doesn't mean they're not going to get the job. It just means that they need to take a moment and then move on. All right. So now let's get into kind of the meat and potatoes of the interview, and we'll talk about what it is that interviewers are looking for during the interview. So interviewers are looking for two things from you in the interview, the good and the bad. They want to know if you're capable of getting the job done while also looking for red flags that may make you a bad candidate, such as tardiness, poor communication skills, and unstable job experience. So they want to see, can you do the job? And then they want to say, are there things that I should worry about? And we don't want to give them anything to worry about. So when I talk about, is this person capable? They want to know, can this person do this specific job well? So they're looking at the skills, experience, education, personality traits, and the culture fit. They're paying attention to all of these different elements when they're deciding if the person can do a good job or not. And here's an example of some things they'd be looking for if they're trying to hire a certified nurse aide, which I know a lot of our programs do IETs for CNAs. So these are some things they'd be looking for. Do they have experience documenting information? Because they're going to be doing that when they're charting. Do they have experience helping people with being patient? Are they able to work as a team? And then they're also going to be looking for those, very specific requirements. Do they have a high school diploma or a GED? You don't have to have one of those to be a CNA in Texas, but it is preferred that you have that. And lastly, they're going to be paying very close attention. Do they have the CNA license, or do they have a plan to take that CNA state exam soon? Those are some very specific things that they're looking for to make sure the person is capable of the job. So we know what kind of good things they're looking for. Now let's talk about some of those red flags that our students may need to overcome. So the first one is fired from their last job. This happens a lot with my students. For one reason or another, they were fired from their job. So a lot of times these students say, well, do I have to answer them if they ask me about if I was ever fired? And the answer is yes, they do have to answer that question of have you ever been fired from a job? But the most important thing here is not to focus on why they were fired and instead focus on how they learned from the experience. So let's say the interviewer says, why were you fired from your last job? Sometimes on the application, they have to answer, I was fired for part of the application. So the answer here could be, I was having trouble getting to work on time. So there's a solid reason. I'm not giving too many details. I was having trouble getting to work on time. But I have since been able to rearrange my schedule to better manage my time and make sure I can show up on time. So this shows, yes, something happened. It was my fault. I don't give a lot of detail. And then I follow it up with, but here's how it's going to be better. Our next one is being overqualified. And you might think, well, what students do we have that are overqualified? This one really relates specifically to our ESL for professional students. So those ones who have degrees from other countries and struggle to overcome employment barriers in the US, typically due to a language barrier. So they might look overqualified when they're applying. And a way to tackle this is when they're in the interview, have the student discuss that they're focusing on improving their English skills while they're working and that they'll be dedicated to their job. So this kind of tackles two things. The employer might be worried about their English. The employer might be worried about them leaving. So if they discuss these two topics, then it relaxes the interviewer a little and they say, oh, okay. So here's an example for you. This just happened to me this week. I have a student who is an engineering professor in India. And she's applying for a teacher aide position at elementary schools. She just completed our paraeducator course. And in the interview, she's going to emphasize how now she's working to pass the TOEFL test. Then she's planning to complete her teacher certification. And then she wants to become a certified teacher with the district. So now the interviewer is looking at this situation not as, oh, this person's going to leave. Oh, this person doesn't have good English. Now they're looking at her as, wow, this person is working very hard. And this is someone we can invest in and train, and she can move up within our organization. So then she's able to overcome those concerns. The next one we'll talk about is gaps in employment. So a big red flag for employers when they're looking at resumes and applications is employment gaps. And minor gaps of up to about 3 months won't be a concern, especially if they were right after everyone got laid off for COVID, things like that. That's not going to be a huge concern. But longer ones, like 6 months or longer, those are going to be a concern. They're going to raise some eyebrows and be like, what's going on with this person? And students should tackle this issue head on before they are asked by providing a simple explanation. So they should not wait to be asked, what were you doing during this time? They should have an explanation ready to go. And for most students, I recommend that they talk about this during the tell me about yourself question. So maybe you had a student that stopped working so that she could take care of her children for 2 years. 2 years is a long time. They're going to kind of be looking for an explanation for that. So what she can do is when she talks about, tell me about yourself, she can include something like, I have 2 years of experience in customer service as both a waitress and hotel front desk clerk. I took some time to focus on my family, but I'm ready to join the workforce and hope to get an opportunity to join your team. So making sure she includes that phrase like ready to join the workforce is essential in overcoming this judgment that they've already passed on her. Our next one is talking about a job hopper. So some of our students may have had a lot of different jobs, especially ones that they only hold for short periods of time. And this is going to be a concern for the employer. Employers don't usually like to hire people that have quit a lot of jobs because they don't want to invest in training someone that won't stay there very long. So any student that's in this situation should focus on how they're ready to commit to one job. They know which type of job they want, and they're very interested in working for this specific company. So talking about how committed they are, how sure they are, what kind of job they want, where they want to work is how they'll overcome this red flag that the employer will have. Now let's talk about what I would call the biggest red flag that I can come across in an interview. Is someone that speaks poorly about their former company or supervisor. So if a student's talking poorly about their other employer, what would they say about the company they're interviewing for? Part of a hiring manager's duties is to essentially be a public relations person and be the face of their company. They wouldn't want to hire someone that may make the company look bad in the community. So this might be challenging for some of our students to avoid during the interview when they're answering questions, because some of them truly have had awful jobs or awful supervisors, but they should focus on facts and be professional. Here's an example for you. The question is, why are you looking to leave your current company? The student might be tempted to say something like, I want to leave my job because I don't like the manager. She's always telling me what to do and makes me come in on my days off sometimes. I don't know why she doesn't just step up and do it herself since she's the boss. And all of this information might be true about their position and their supervisor, but it doesn't give the interviewer the right impression. So instead, the students can say, I'm looking for a position with a more team-oriented company and supervisor that works together when things need to be done. So this answer instead focuses on what we're looking for rather than complaining about what we have now. And it also gives the impression that we're ready to be a team worker instead of blaming other people. Another common question is, why do you want to work here? And students often tell me how they think this is a dumb question because the answer is obviously that they want to earn money. Why do you want to work here? Well, I want to have a paycheck, obviously. But the question isn't really asking about money. It's asking about why the student wants to work for that specific company. And by the time the student gets into the interview, they should have done research on the company already online to be able to talk about what they like about the specific workplace, like a mission statement, the company has innovative solutions, or they have a good reputation. And at no point in the interview should a student discuss how desperate they are for money. That might be true, but it's not giving the interviewer the right impression. And our last red flag we'll talk about is a student that doesn't have any work experience. So sometimes the student has had 0 jobs in the past. They don't have any work experience to talk about. In this case, they need to focus on situations that they came across in school or family situations. For example, if they're asked how they work under pressure, they can talk about how they had a final exam for their IET training class, and they had to balance home responsibilities and studying at the same time. And during this explanation, they should emphasize how they worked on creating priorities and that that's how they stay calm under pressure. And other questions that they're asked, they should be able to focus on willing to learn new things. When you don't have experience, you have to be willing to learn or you'll never get the experience. And employers love having employees that are teachable and don't act like a know-it-all. So now that we've talked about some of the difficult topics to overcome, do we have any questions?
There was a question about job hopping. Is that really a thing now? Because there's a lot of people that go from job to job and some employers are okay with that. What are your thoughts on that? Is it really a thing? I mean, I know that, before I was told, you shouldn't go from job to job, but I think it's more prevalent now that individuals are going from job to job. And Levon says, yes, it is a thing. No, I understand that job hopping is a thing, but I'm saying, are employers more willing to overlook that now?
I think it really depends on the viewpoint of the company and the level of experience that's required. If it's an entry level position, they're probably like, okay, it's kind of called the gig economy sometimes, what you're talking about. So it really depends on the company. Some companies will say, that's not a big deal. We love people that have lots of different types of experience. And other companies might, not be okay with that. They might say, no, we invest a lot of time and money into training our employees. We really don't want someone that will just leave. So I think really depends on, I see Jesse mentioned in the chat too, it depends on that company culture. It depends a lot on that. So that varies. So in general, I'd say it's best advice to show that someone can work somewhere for a while. A lot of recruiters I've talked to have said that they only really like to hire someone that's worked and held a job for a year. So that 1 year mark, they say it's okay if they've had other types of jobs and multiple jobs, but they want someone that can at least work somewhere for a year.
Like the stability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Levon says very common in younger generations. Thank you, Levon. Very good. I think that was it. I don't see any other questions.
All right. We'll move on then. Okay, so we've talked about some of the difficult topics, but now let's talk about the questions that they have to answer. So like I mentioned earlier, we've got 3 main types of questions. The first one is the tell me about yourself question. Everyone that's ever been in an interview knows this one's going to come, and it's going to come early in the interview. So we'll spend some time talking about that. And most of the other types of questions in the interviews can be considered either direct questions or situational questions. Okay, so we know that this question is going to come. We know it's usually one of the first questions, and I'd say it's one of the most important ones to get right. I kind of look at interviews as a bookshelf with 2 bookends. So we start off with how they look and how their presence is in the interview room, and then the tell me about yourself question. This kind of sets the scene. And then the questions in the middle are important, but I don't think they're quite as important as tell me about yourself, because as the interview progresses, the interviewer's making decisions. Do I like this person? Can they get the job done? Do I see any major issues? So it's important to have a great first impression here. So before you talk with students about what they should say and tell me about yourself, we need to take a look at what they should not say. So some things that they should not include are things like age, religion, children, hobbies, life problems, and issues with past jobs. There are a few exceptions to some of these, such as if you're applying for an administrative assistant job at a mosque, it would make sense to mention your religion here because it's a religious organization. Or if they're applying for a job at a school district, you may want to mention how you have kids in the school district and you and your kids have had great experiences with the staff, so you want to be part of that team. So there are some exceptions to these, but really at no point should things about life problems and issues with the past be brought up in the interview. Now let's talk about what we should say in the interview for the tell me about yourself answer. So we want to talk about work history, skills or personal qualities that make us good for the job. And it's important that you talk with students about that it's only for that specific job. So if a student is applying for a sales associate position at a retail store, they don't need to mention how good they are at cooking. That's a good skill to have, but it's not relevant to this job. So they only need ones relevant to that job. They'll also want to include their education or licenses they have, why they want to work in that specific field or job, and why they want to work at that specific facility or company. And I mentioned the last one because, you know, all of us like to receive compliments. They like to hear something nice. And like I mentioned earlier, the person that's interviewing them is essentially a public relations person for that company. So they work very hard to make sure the community respects that organization. So they love to hear good things about the place that they work for. So if we say things like, I've heard really great things about your company. One of my friends works here and she really enjoys her job. Different things like that are very meaningful to the interviewer. So what I do when I'm teaching this in class is I have students write a short outline to answer each of these questions. So I put this information in a PowerPoint for students. I put this up on the board and I say, okay, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. Go ahead and write an outline for how you'd answer these different questions. And then I make each student answer the question out loud. Because if they can't practice in front of the class and in front of me, people that they're familiar with, they're not going to do a good job in the interview. So I don't let anyone pass on answering the tell me about yourself question in class. So the first time they do it, it's going to be very choppy because they're going to try to read from their notes and answer it like a bullet point. But when they're in the interview, it has to be very smooth and make sense and sound like a smooth flow of a story for the interviewer. So they should not only practice in class the one time, you should make sure they practice other times before they get into the actual interview. So I'll give you an example of an answer to the tell me about yourself question for a student applying to a CNA job. And I'll hit all of the elements listed in front of you. I have 3 years of experience in customer service. As a waitress, I learned how to prioritize and use time efficiently. I also worked as a cook, where I learned how important it is to follow cleanliness standards and work as a team. I love interacting with people and am very friendly. I have my GED, and I also just completed my CNA training course. I have my state exam scheduled for next week, and I'm so excited. I have always wanted to work in the healthcare field since I saw how important CNAs are during the time my grandpa was in a nursing home. I think CNAs and other staff make such a big difference in their patients' lives. I'd love to work for this nursing facility because I've heard so many great things about the team here, and I admire your dedication to providing quality care to every resident. So that one was very smooth, was well written out. And so the students should, as they're writing it, they'll start out with their bullet points. They'll practice saying that out loud, get some feedback on, well, this didn't really make sense, or, oh, you didn't include any personal qualities. And then they'll end up writing it out and then practicing that and not necessarily memorizing it, but making sure they hit the main points there. So those are all of the things they need to include in their answer there. So our next type of question is the direct question. So if you've ever studied communications, you've probably heard about close-ended or direct questions. And many of the interview questions are going to appear to be close-ended questions, but we want to treat all of the questions like they're open-ended questions in the interview. So sometimes the question appears to be a yes or no question, but we never want to stop talking with just yes or no in the interview. Here's an example. What experience do you have in the medical field? And the student just says none. I don't have any experience. Or they just say 2 years. They've technically answered the question. They've answered it truthfully, but this is not the best answer because it's being treated like a direct question. But like I said, we want to treat them all like open-ended questions. On the other hand, students sometimes do what I call the river of words, where they keep saying a lot of semi-relevant sentences to the questions, but they don't really answer the question that was asked. And when they do this, it makes it really hard for the interviewer to assess their answer and figure out the answer to their question. They've said lots of things, but didn't really answer the question. So a lot of times our students will make one of two mistakes for these. They'll either say too little, yes, no, or they'll say too much and talk about their other job experience, but not answer that they don't actually have medical experience. So how can these students say the perfect amount of information? They only need to do two things here. They answer the question directly, or they follow up with evidence, support, or explanation. So two parts. They answer the question, do you have experience? Yes, I have 2 years. And then we'll need to follow it up with evidence, support, or explanation. So a lot of times when I say, okay, answer the question and follow it up, they say, what are you talking about? What do you mean follow it up? I answered the question. I don't know what else I need to say. So the way that I teach this is I explain to them that an interview with the direct questions is very similar to a persuasive 5-paragraph essay. You're trying to persuade the employer you're the perfect person for the job. And the introduction of an essay is very similar to the tell me about yourself question. Then the body paragraphs are like the direct questions. Each one has a topic sentence, which is the direct answer to the question. And then in the paragraph, the rest of the sentences are giving explanation on why it's true or providing an example or two. And this is exactly the same as when we're speaking. And I say, why do you think your teachers tortured you with writing essays? Because it's very similar to oral communication, where you make a point and then you explain the point. And once I explain it and compare it to an essay, it makes it a lot easier for them to understand what they should be doing. So here's an example of a good answer to that direct question. So the question is, what experience do you have in the medical field? I don't have any experience yet, but I've really been enjoying learning more about the healthcare field in my CNA externship and hope to apply the skills I have learned in a job here. So they've answered the question, I don't have any experience, but I want you to pay attention to how they say yet. This shows, yes, I'm willing to continue. I'm willing to learn. I don't have it yet, but I have a very strong, concrete plan on how I will get more skills and more experience. And our last type of question is a situational question. So employers use these situational questions because it's easy for someone to say, I'm a great team player. But it's really hard for the interviewer to decide on how valid that statement is. And this is why they use those situational questions. They want to see if the situations you've dealt with in the past really align with what you're saying about yourself. And the way that students would answer these questions is with the STAR method. So each of the letters in STAR is an element in the answer. So we start off with the situation, where they're essentially setting the scene of what was happening. Then they continue on to the task. What needed to be done exactly? Next, the action. Which specific actions did we take? And finally, we talk about the result. And we always want to pick stories where we are the ones taking action, not someone else. We don't want someone else to do a great job. We want to show how we did a great job. And we need to kind of pick stories where we're going to be the good guy in the story. We don't want to tell stories that are going to make us look bad. We want to look really good in the interview. And when you talk about these situational questions, it's important to remind students not to lie in interview questions. They're going to say, well, you know, how am I supposed to know what they're going to ask me? And there are a lot of really common questions that are situational, and they can prepare. They can have time to reflect on what kind of situations have I been in that are applicable before they get in the interview. So at this point, this is when I would typically supply the student with a list of common situational questions. So then they have time to say, oh yes, I did have some situations where I solved problems. Oh yeah, I did a team project in this other situation. So providing those questions and giving them time to think about the answers is really important. So we'll take a look at 3 examples of some situational questions together and how to answer them. So here's our first example. Tell me about a project you initiated. So a lot of times these situational questions are going to start off with tell me about a time. That's the most common introduction to these questions. So here's an example answer. When I was working at Forever 21 as a stock associate, I noticed that it was taking a very long time for employees to locate products in the stockroom, which left customers waiting for a long time, and they would sometimes get upset. I realized that the reason that it was taking so long was because the employees that worked on the sales floor didn't understand the organization system the stock team used. I worked with my manager to help train all the sales associates on how the organization works over about a month or so. After we trained all of the sales associates, they were able to locate products much faster, and we even started doing better on our customer satisfaction surveys. So that answer had all of the elements. They talked about the situation, the task, the actions that they took, and the result. They picked one where they were the one that did something, they helped the manager train, they thought of the idea, and then they talk about how they had an excellent result at the end. They were able to locate products faster, and they got higher customer satisfaction surveys. Here's a second example. Tell me about a time when you worked with a team to accomplish a goal. While working at my cashier job at a restaurant, we had some trouble getting enough staff after we opened the dining room back up after closing it for a few months for COVID. We needed to find a way to serve both the customers in the drive-thru and the dining room at the same time. It was challenging to do with the small staff that we had at the time, so my boss wanted us to think of ways that we could get new employees. I thought of the idea to make flyers and post them at the city library because I'd seen a lot of people visiting there. I created the flyer with one of my coworkers, sent it to my boss, and he got it posted in the library. We were able to hire 4 new employees that had seen the job posting at the library. It was great to be able to hire new employees after working as a team to recruit them. Okay, and here's one more example. Describe a situation where you had a conflict with another individual. How did you deal with it? Employers love to ask this question because one of the top reasons they get rid of employees is because they have issues with another employee. So here's an example of how they solved a conflict. One time while working as a supervisor, one of my employees seemed very upset at me and I didn't know why. I found out that she had been complaining to other staff members about how she wasn't getting enough hours, which she blamed on me because I make the schedules. I felt that the right thing to do was to talk to her about it directly. After talking to her, I found out that I had made a mistake and not updated her availability in the system. I thought she was still only able to work 2 days a week, so that's what I was scheduling her. After talking to her, I found out that I'd made a mistake and not updated it. So they've admitted to the mistake here. They said, yes, there was a conflict and I was the reason for the conflict. So then she talks about, I apologized and was able to correct it and give her more hours. I have found that miscommunication is the cause of most conflicts with people. And I think talking about issues is better than ignoring them. So this answer provides lots of good things for the interviewer. They see 1, they're able to admit to mistakes. 2, they're able to talk with people during conflicts. And 3, they're able to recognize that communication is important. So those are the 3 types of questions. And there's one type of question that can sometimes confuse our students. And this is, what would you do if? So if the student does not have a lot of work experience, the interviewer may ask them questions, what would you do if? So hypothetical situations. And when students hear these questions, they sometimes say, well, they've given me a situation, so I should use the STAR method. I need to talk about the situation, task, action, and result. But they can't do that because it hasn't actually happened. They don't have a result to talk about. They don't have a story to be the hero of. So they can't use the STAR method. So they should instead use the direct question method. I would do this. So directly answer the question because, and then give an explanation. And a lot of times this would say, they can do something like, I would do this because in my training, I learned that in this type of situation, we should use this solution and things like that. And that's how they can rely more on their education to solve problems, or they can relate it to similar situations that have happened in their family or in school. And lastly, we'll talk about how we can prepare our students for the interviews. I know a lot of you said that you do mock interviews, but there are some other things you can also do. One, I would say make sure that they know you're sympathetic. Say things like, I know job interviews suck, they're hard. You feel really nervous and you feel like you have to prove yourself to people. And knowing that you understand that will open themselves up to you more better to be able to explain things to them. Second, give them lots of examples. You can have them do mock interview after mock interview after mock interview, and it won't get better unless you've provided examples to them to model after. Third, make sure they feel safe in their practice space. A lot of them are feeling very nervous and very judged by their peers in the classroom or even just with you. So making sure you say things like, this is our practice arena. This is where you can make mistakes. It's better to make a mistake here than it is to make it in the real interview. Fourth, give constructive feedback. If you just tell students that are nervous, oh, you're doing a great job, that was a great answer, it's not going to help them. It's not going to help them in the long run. You might feel bad for a moment saying, well, this person's already nervous and I told them they didn't do a very good job. That's still not helpful for them. You have to give them real feedback for real life situations with examples, hopefully. And lastly, make sure they have the tech skills for a virtual interview. A lot of interviews nowadays are on the phone or on Zoom or on Skype or something like this. And making sure that they have those skills and have practiced that is very important. So maybe they can do a Zoom practice interview with you, and then it's the same thing. So even if they're in person, they'll still have the experience from practicing with you on Zoom and different things like that. So to summarize everything we've talked about today, we want to make sure our students feel prepared and confident. We know what recruiters and interviewers are looking for. They're looking for the capabilities and those red flags. We know how we can help students overcome some of the red flags they might have, such as being fired from a job or not having work experience. We understand the 3 question formats: the tell me about yourself, direct questions, and the situational questions. And lastly, that for interviews, practice equals preparedness. We don't want our students to memorize. We want them to understand what types of things they should talk about and go in feeling confident and prepared.
Great information, Andrea. I know it was a lot of information, a lot of great information to help our students with that interview process.
Oh, yes, I have a question just really quick. So I
Okay.
know whenever there's a student who doesn't have experience in a field, they can say, I don't have experience yet, but I can learn and, other stuff to help. But what if they don't have experience at all? Because I have some students who come and they haven't worked in their country at all. So in that case, how should I help them with questions and resumes?
Okay, great question. So in terms of the interview questions, if they don't have any work experience at all, this is what you would do. Okay, let me backtrack a second. Okay, if they have 0 work experience, then you tell them to focus on family and school situations. So even if they have limited education in their home country, they can talk about things like, maybe overcoming a challenge is the question. Then they can say something like, at first, I was really challenged by the technology I had to use. My English class uses Zoom. So I took the time to do research and I talked with my teacher and my counselor, and then I was able to figure it out. And I've been successfully taking English classes for 6 months online.
Oh, okay, I understand. Okay, thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you,
No
Robin.
problem.
And there was a question from Kelly, and she says, do you ever video students while they are practicing?
I haven't done that before. I've offered it to students. I never, record students without their permission. And the students have said that they're so nervous, they don't want to be recorded. But if I had a student that gave me permission, that's something I'd be interested in, because I think it's really helpful for them to be able to see what mistakes they're making, what type of body language they have, their tone, things like that. So it's not something I've done before, but if a student wanted it, I would recommend it.
Very good. And one last comment from Maria Morrow with TWC. She said, I would recommend that, I guess this is to Robin, that they talk about the skills they're expected to apply in the job they're interviewing for that they have done in personal or school life. So kind of those skills that they already, transferable skills is what they're called, those transferable skills. Thank you, Maria, for mentioning that. All right. Marcia says, research the job and letting the interviewer know that they have looked up the position. Yes, definitely. And Margaret Elaine says, some jobs do not list education requirements. How do we help students navigate knowing if they can get hired before they acquire the GED?
I mean,
that's a good question.
that
Because
is a good question.
Many jobs today require high school equivalency at minimum. So good question.
If you don't
So for-
mind, I can answer that question.
Okay.
Oh, before they acquire their GED, usually if they're already in GED class or they're taking a certain course, then I'll just list it and tell them, just like how you would do in a normal resume, GED acquired 2021, or you put the approximate date when they'd graduate or get their diploma.
I see, like an anticipated date. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today, for all the great questions and the great feedback. We appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Laura, for being a wonderful host and helping everybody out. Thank you, everybody.